thank you for joining today's special webcast, Reimagining Workforce Ecosystems, Navigating Change with Talent Intelligence. I'm John Gates, Senior Fellow in the Human Capital Center with the Conference Board. Our main topics of discussion today will be the workforce ecosystem imperative, focus on skills and user experience, and technology-enabled transformation, specifically around moving from a jobs-based system to a skills-based system. If you need a attendance certificate for this webcast, click the icon shown to download your certificate at the end of the webcast. You can use that to claim continuing education credits if you hold a certification. To get the most out of this webcast, make sure to utilize the engagement tools located at the bottom of your screen. Using these, you can ask questions to the presenters and download available resources. Now, please join me in welcoming our guests for today, Jason Serrato, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Eightfold, and Sana Mano, Managing Director of Workforce Transformation at Deloitte. Jason and Sana, take it away.
Thank you so much, John. Jason, love to have you go first and introduce yourself, and then I will go and kick us off with our content.
Sure. Thanks, Sana, and thanks, John. As mentioned, Jason Serrato, a part of the product team at Eightfold, covering our talent management, talent intelligence platform, and talent insights offerings. In the former life, I've been an industry analyst, and I've also been a talent acquisition leader. Very excited to join everyone here on the call to talk about this very hot topic, especially in today's world. Get a chance to meet with a lot of HR leaders, and it seems like everyone, if not just discussing this, is actually trying to tackle this in their organization. So looking forward to a very robust conversation.
Wonderful. Well, Jason, I'm so delighted to be doing this session with you. For the audience to know, Jason is a co-host of a podcast called The New Talent Code. So lots of interesting thoughts that Jason has to share. And I know we always enjoy talking, Jason, so looking forward to this dialogue and sharing it with the audience. I'm Sana Manzo. I'm a managing director with our workforce transformation practice at Deloitte. Our perspective on human capital and the trends that are making an impact in the market will definitely be part of the themes that we talk about today. I've been in the talent acquisition and more broadly the talent space for over 25 years and have always been very passionate about the intersectionality with evolving strategy, how organizations are responding to the needs of talent of the day, and in particular, exciting evolution of technology. And certainly a hot topic these days with AI and the transformational nature of that, helping us progress our talent strategies. So we are just really excited to share some content with you today to set the stage. We want this to be conversational. Please ask questions as you go along. You might notice as we talk about disruption, there's a bit of tech disruption for me on my end, so I may appear frozen to you. I am in California and the sun's out, so I'm not freezing personally, but apologize for the video disturbance there. And also just wanted to wish happy spring to everyone. We know a lot of people are dealing with some extreme weather, so please stay safe. And if you are celebrating many of the holidays coming up this week, we're wishing you the best. Well, let's jump into it. We're going to spend some time talking about just the framework of what is going on in our world, right? Work has changed, and we've all been feeling that as HR leaders and business leaders and IT leaders. We see it happening around us. What are some of those disruptions that we're seeing? Certainly that work has become more fluid. We've had to respond to the needs of the day, with all the disruptions that we have been having just in general. And certainly as things are continuing to transform in our organizations with technology landscapes and organizational change. So work is often fluid, not always predetermined. We're really changing the focus on creating value, right? We're getting away from static job descriptions and really looking at the broader value that the work can be making an impact on. And increasingly work group oriented, and what we, of course, are all feeling that, right? We may have particular roles, but the amount of time that we're spending on group work group oriented activities and how those span across the organization and functions is a kind of very interesting aspect of how work is changing. And, we see some of these other aspects that are continuing to evolve. So with the work changing, certainly leaders are grappling with complex challenges across work, workforce, and workplace. And, we do, kind of a quarterly update, the Deloitte and Fortune 500 perspective on CEO sensing. And some of these themes are obviously ones that we continue to see evolving. Certainly the focus on talent has been at the top of the list for a long time, and that percentage continues to increase. And it spans across a lot of different topic areas. When we think about this, from an industry perspective, every industry is facing some sort of labor challenge. And one of the things we can really think about the way we transform that is putting our, our skills thinking hat on, if you will, right? And that's what CEOs are worried about, like the skills, how do we access those skills? How do we think about what our business needs to address disruption? And then broadening the workforce ecosystem, that was certainly part of the theme of today. What is this workforce ecosystem mindset that we, speak of? Ultimately, it is, getting away from the siloed thinking about bringing talent into an organization separately from how we manage our employee population, separately from our alternative workforce. And so really important that we think about the workforce in general, and those will be some themes that we talk about. And then, of course, the fast pace of technology coming into play as well. As we delve into this workforce ecosystem aspect a little bit further, I mean, it's all intuitive to us, right? We all have faced, bringing in alternative workforce components, whether those are partners working with us, contingent workforce, but really, there are many different aspects of that, crowdsourcing, even technology at the table, right? Where does AI, robotic processing fit in as part of our workforce? And so understanding those complex components, even including internal gig marketplaces and the way that we look at service providers and development opportunities, we need to be thinking about that very holistically when it comes to evaluating our skills and capabilities. Hey, Jason, I'm going to let you just chat for a minute about that, and I'll be right back.
Sure. I think this is such a hot topic because a lot of organizations for the last few years have gone through digital transformation. And the same way digital transformation requires really the whole organization to get involved and to look at their processes and to kind of understand how they can benefit from that type of transformation for the ultimate ROI to be achieved. I think talent transformation operates the same way. It's this concept of, like you just mentioned, Sana, looking beyond specific audiences or specific initiatives and getting everyone on board cross-functionally across the organization, different audiences, different sources, to really look at the world of work differently. And it's not just, the way we categorize work or the way we accomplish work, it's the way we're actually working, hybrid, remote, asynchronous. So there's just a lot of transformation going on. And I think that's why this is top of mind for everyone.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about how the technology can help improve that approach. One of the things that we're seeing is, despite a real plan to move forward in becoming more of a skills-based organization, the number of organizations that are actually taking active activity to move in that is not as great, right? So that's part of the dialogue today. How do we help set you up to be thinking about this journey and really coming up with an opportunity to focus on that? We do see a lot of experimentation going on, and that's the exciting theme I think that we'll see. We talked about the change in the work, but what we're seeing is this is having a direct impact on the construct of jobs, right? And so the sentiment in our skills-based org survey, that really was a global survey sensing what is happening out in the market and the way organizations are addressing this, is you see that both from the business executive and the worker side, that there is, a growing understanding that we need to think about work in a different way. And so moving beyond the jobs is a bit of a provocative sentiment, right? Like you've heard maybe the end of jobs. So it's definitely a journey. How do we start addressing that? and looking at the ways in which we can activate that in a more meaningful way. So what is driving organizations to pursue these skills-based practices? Certainly we've touched on some of these themes. Talent shortages is a huge driver. And while we see ebb and flow, certainly with what's happening in certain segments and sectors today, we know that some of these are short-term challenges, and that the talent shortage issues in tech in particular, and many different aspects of healthcare, those continue to be on the radar and need to be addressed. So, lots of different aspects here. Obviously the advent of new technologies and automation with AI is driving that, and being able to unlock some of the capabilities at the same time. So really, skills becomes kind of foundational, right? It's what makes workers unique. So when we talk about this concept of skills, we really think of it as really a bit of shorthand, right? It's not just technical skills or hard skills, but really also things like the human aspects, what we call it the enduring human capabilities, emotional intelligence, critical thinking, and also potential. And so certainly, as you see here on the right, skills, interests, passions, motivations, all these things come into play. But at the essence, skills is really, giving us a lexicon and a framework for assessing these. And this concept of jobs becoming less relevant, as we saw from both sides, both workers saying they're performing work outside their jobs, all the way through, the sentiment and job descriptions that are starting to need to be addressed, so that we don't see a disconnect between the way we're actually going to market and what we're seeing in our organizations. And individuals want to be seen for their intrinsic aspects as well, right? They're not just someone fulfilling a job or a job description that they've applied for, but they're really looking to self-actualize. Really, how do they continue to progress in their career? What are those skill sets that they have? And how can they really get to a position where they have greater insight in their organizations to understand what the opportunities are? Not only to increase their skill set to be effective today, but really what are those skills that they need to start to identify and progress in for their own growth and progression, whether that's lateral movement or whether that's upward movement. Certainly, again, kind of foundational there. Jason, I know, this whole concept of individuals having opportunities to understand more broadly within their organization is a really hot topic. And talent marketplace is a big area that we see that coming into place. Anything you want to share in this regard here?
I think that's part of the reason why the shift towards more of a skills-based approach and using some new technologies like AI and talent intelligence is coming into play. If you're focusing on the work at hand and what are the skills that may be needed to address that work or accomplish that work, then you're not kind of penned in by a role or a job title or a requisition. And if you break it down at the molecular level by skill, you may already have those skills in your organization, and you can compile a team of individuals that may be able to address that work in some way. And in many cases, it may allow for career development or skill attainment, but it also allows you to potentially maximize the existing talent you have on hand, versus always trying to solve things with requisitions and going outside of the organization. And as we've seen in some instances lately, organizations end up overhiring. But I think being able to break down things to kind of the skill component allows you to look at talent and look at work very differently to then try to solve for that issue in new ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And the ultimate outcome, as we can see here on the right, we're already starting to see that worker sentiment. They feel their experience will be vastly improved, and they will be more likely to stay in an organization. And ultimately, what a positive outcome for all of us, right?
And the other thing I would add just to that real quick is I don't think much of this is new. I think it's just new capability to be able to get at the data and visualize it and make decisions from it. I mean, people have always had skills beyond their job and have always done things in organizations beyond their immediate responsibility, whether it be volunteering or employee resource groups or any type of, kind of group or club activities. But with everything in a lot of systems and a lot of approaches being built around jobs, right? A lot of that other work or other skill development was invisible. And I think now, as you think about tracking all this activity in new ways and opening up opportunities and getting visibility for people to do new things, you're getting a more complete picture of what someone is able to do beyond just, the way their job is classified in an HCM suite or an HRIS system. And now you're able to leverage individuals for much more broader opportunities, as well as just kind of create a more transparent organization and start to, democratize opportunity through visibility.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that democratization aspect is so interesting and important in the conversation, right? As we've seen organizations move in this direction. Let's make sure that we, acknowledge that there's a big cultural change aspect in some of this. To your point, Jason, a lot of this has not been visible in the past. And now making it visible, has lots of benefits. But transforming the culture to really be one that is democratized is definitely a journey. And I know that there have, some organizations have really, had some experimentation where they've really recognized the greater need for culture change and the messaging and of course, the adoption aspect of making sure that we're kind of unlocking those capabilities opportunities.
I was just chatting with a talent management executive this morning on this topic. And I think, as you mentioned, a lot of organizations have been experimenting or piloting things, and they may have started to tackle this with things like, internal marketplaces. But if they're doing it, they may be doing it within a function or within a location or within a business segment. And for true talent transformation, you really need to start unlocking and opening up the organization to encourage that mobility. But I think a big part of that is not just technology enablement, it's also, process and practice and culture.
Yeah, no, it's such a great point. We did, a whole series of kind of eminence in the marketplace, kind of talking about this concept of enabling the talent marketplace. And it is that broader aspect. Obviously, the technology foundation is so critical, but what are those other enabling factors that need to happen? Policy, process, culture, and the whole process of experimentation is very, I think, rich in terms of that learning, but recognizing at the front end how these things can be pulled together for effectiveness is really important. And I think some of the interesting outcomes, just one more thing that we'll touch on, some of the examples that we've been seeing out in the marketplace. There's, a large financial services organization who had, implemented a talent marketplace capability. And one of the things during early times during the pandemic, they were able to see is the skills adjacency aspect, right? Understanding the skills that individuals had, and then those adjacencies actually helped them redeploy talent to a really critical needed area. And we see that in manufacturing organizations and healthcare organizations, like every industry can benefit from that. But it's definitely one of the, I think, the exciting opportunities for organizations to think about beyond the democratization, helping organizations and individuals actualize. It's that broader impact on the organization to get the work done and disruption as well.
And I think, by taking that skills approach, you're able to get at, insights like skills adjacencies and learnability and capability analysis for what someone could potentially learn quickly based off of what they already know. And I think, you just gave us a couple use cases. Another one that we've experienced working with companies was, incorporating that kind of skill-based approach into succession planning. And when you change the criteria or add additional consideration for how you build out, your succession bench and build a potential succession plan, you increase the audience for potential consideration and inclusion. And as a result, we've already seen organizations consider talent from other parts of the organization that may not have been included before, open up the audience for diversity and inclusion initiatives around casting a broader net. But I think it's taking that skills-based approach that starts to unlock some of this.
Yeah, it's a great point. Well, you can see here, we won't, drain this slide, but, the areas that are investing are across the spectrum, and I think growing in a lot of these areas that we'll continue to see. We've been talking about some of these great results. I mean, this, I think, is a great summary of where we're seeing these, obviously growth and development, retaining high performers, positive workforce experience. A lot of those attributes are certainly coming through. But interesting other ones that start to come out, right? Like organizations who are skills-based are, a much higher percentage likely to be innovators. And so the impact is not just on our talent equation, but truly our organizational ability to deliver on, our higher level goals as organizations as well. And so I think, so much to unpack here, but certainly skills-based organizational strategy is starting to, really prove out results and see that adaptiveness to change, et cetera. So when we think about putting skills-based orgs into practice, what we kind of have a four operating principles around that. And when we think of a workforce of one, it's those themes that Jason and I have been talking about, really, right? Enabling the individual to be able to visualize and activate their own skills and their skills journey, and also be recognized for what they're doing. But equally, like being able to make the right decisions based on skills can come into play at every level of the talent equation. And we're going to look at that in just a minute on how some of those things are coming to life. And then here you see like skills-based workforce practices on the rise, not only where organizations are committing or have committed, where they're experimenting, which is obviously a much greater percentage, but also really interesting insights in terms of the workers who say, skills-based strategies in these areas would improve their experience, whether that's in the hiring journey or once they're in an organization, et cetera. And Jason, you mentioned the impact on inclusion from an internal perspective. I think there's also some really interesting things that are coming to light in terms of the impact on, removing bias at the front end, giving more transparency to candidates coming in and looking at opportunities, and how that actually is transforming for organizations their ability to attract and connect with a more diverse pool of candidates.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it firsthand from using, skill inferences and skill matching and, adjacencies like you shared. If you use that on the front end for building out kind of the calibration of your role, or for how personalized experiences end up matching talent to opportunities, it ends up creating a broader audience to select from, because now you're not just limited to what's on paper or keyword matching. I'll share with you a story. I used to lead campus recruiting, and we used to go and recruit for engineers, and we would match to a requisition that said we needed mechanical engineers, and we would turn away people that weren't pursuing a mechanical engineering degree, not realizing that if they were pursuing a biomedical or biomechanical engineering degree, the difference between those two degrees was only 2 classes in the curriculum, but the majority of the students in that other degree were female. It was where most of the females were in the engineering student body. So just by looking at keywords and matching, we ended up turning away a significant diverse audience, not knowing how skill adjacencies work. And I think today we have this ability now to get more of that information and insights dynamically, and avoid some of that and broaden the audience.
Yeah, that's a great insight. One of the things I thought I'd touch on here is, skills-based workforce planning. This is an area that's been evolving. We've certainly been seeing, skills-based strategies around hiring and talent, internal mobility and retention, all those. The workforce planning piece, starting to pull that up more towards the front end. We're seeing a lot of discussions going on in that area. And while you see, maybe lower in terms of where people have taken this into their organizations, I think this is going to be an area we'll continue to see. I know, Jason, there's a lot of evolution going on in terms of how do we look at skills and look, again, the build, buy, borrow equation, if you will, from a workforce planning perspective, and not just what we need now, but from a future of work lens. And I think skills really helps us unlock, some of those insights, and with the rich, talent intelligence platform capabilities that we're going to turn our conversation to next. One of the really interesting aspects of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's very exciting and I'm super passionate about. And I think when you start to incorporate things like skill-based workforce planning and skill-based job architecture, it allows you to not only recruit and retain and upskill individuals, but also start to redesign work and incorporate all different data sets and information in how you do this. So you're not just looking at your own organizational information, you're looking at what's happening in your industry and what's happening in your market, and how are other like companies building out their workforce, and where do you need to compete. And I think this is especially timely as a lot of industries are evolving with advanced capabilities, but also a lot of organizations are pivoting into new industries, right? So you have a lot of organizations that are taking on a new type of work for the first time, or delivering to their customers in a new way. And this is really requiring HR to get involved in redesigning work for a future facing workforce.
Yes. Well, I want to use this just to transition. So, really this is just saying, like, imagine, if you will, that your people within and coming into the organization can do their best work by applying their unique skills and talents to deliver outcomes that matter. How do we think about that as we broaden, from these, components that we've been talking about to more of a holistic view? And this is really just intended to depict, if we put the employee journey with skills at the center, we can actually think about skills where they fit and leverage, AI technology here is kind of highlighted in green across the spectrum to really engage each of the personas, that certainly the employee at the center here, but it also helps empower all the individuals who are supporting that, whether there's recruiters or hiring managers or coaches, everyone across the spectrum coming together to make sure that we don't just activate this at one point, but we continue it as foundational throughout the life cycle, which is helping, continue to pull that thread of skills and skills enablement through. Jason, I want to turn it over to you now to talk about, this important concept of talent intelligence responding to these changes.
Yeah, and I love the slide you just shared kind of with that workflow. I think, like I said, historically, a lot of HR processes and as a result, HR systems were built around the job, with the requisition kind of as the cornerstone, and everything oriented itself to that. Who was the hiring manager for that role? Who was the interviewing team? Where did it sit in the org chart? I think what we're starting to really be able to execute on is more talent-centered design, with optimizing around talent than around the role. So what we're seeing is organizations turning to talent intelligence to start to respond to this change. And it really is incorporating a broader set of data and encompassing kind of the entire holistic workflow of the candidate experience, employee experience, organizational progression in their industry, and start to incorporate things like benchmarking their workforce against their industry, trying to align their talent strategies with their business strategies. So that way, when they look up and they feel that they've progressed in that strategy, did they actually arrive where they thought they were going to be? And I think ever more these days, it's really hard to predict where you need to be. So this needs to be more of a dynamic, scenario-based process. And then by having this visibility into your talent, you're able to invest in the right talent with individuals that are learning and developing rising skills that are becoming more and more important for where your work is headed. And then you can empower, individual execution that allows them to kind of take on their career and own their career, but in a way that's mutually beneficial for the person and for the organization. I think what we're starting to see is this kind of relationship with this concept of talent intelligence, where it's this segment that kind of sits in the middle of a variety of processes and practices and HR tools. And it really helps organizations deal with the fast pace of this change and the dynamic nature of this undertaking to better understand the talent they have, the work they may need to do, and where they're headed. And then to partner with systems of record like an applicant tracking system, a learning management system, or an HCM suite to organize that, to then come back and execute on that using a skill-based, talent-centered approach. And I think one of the things that we're also increasingly seeing is how this is encompassing talent acquisition and talent management and what we call talent flex, which is contingent workers in more of a total talent approach. It's not segmented by audience or segmented by business owner. It really is having a more all-encompassing view of how talent is flowing into your organization. And like we've mentioned a few times here now, we're also starting to see evaluating skills and how skills are progressing and which ones are rising and which ones are declining, to really help inform how organizations are investing in skills. And it's no longer a conversation of build, buy, borrow. It's build, buy, borrow, or bot. We work with companies that are using multiple elements of an approach like this, and they're trying to figure out, which skills do we want to invest in as our organizational IP? Which skills do we want to borrow as needed from a contractor perspective? Which skills do we not have internally that we need to acquire from the market from a recruiting perspective? And now all of this data is feeding into a more comprehensive overall talent strategy, where, just a few years ago, we were still operating in silos.
Yeah, and those, breaking down those silos and having a more holistic view is just really transforming the way organizations are thinking about this, right? We are looking at re-architecting work because we have greater insights into this, and we're changing the way that we're thinking about that. Jason, one of the things that comes to mind, that I may not be intuitive from this slide is, I think for the organizations that are on, a major core platform or have, like one of the major ATSs, et cetera, what's been fascinating to us is, this solution, having a talent intelligence platform by April, is really unlocking the value of the data that they have. So organizations have invested for years in developing, talent information, but not being able to leverage it in the way that now talent intelligence insights allows you to do, in conjunction with some of these broader, global data sets that you have.
Yeah, I recently heard someone refer to it, and they refer to it as, it helps bring the data to life. It helps it come to life. But also, again, it's not just, matching or natural language processing. It's also understanding contextual information for how talent interacts with your specific organization, and also includes industry insights for how talent is moving within your industry with specific benchmark companies. So I think it's the learning and the contextual understanding that also starts to build these relationships amongst kind of skills and skill clusters and competencies and traits, where you start to understand, how does our organization look at talent compared to our industry? What does this skill mean in the context of our organization? How do we move talent through our organization? And then when talent is coming to you from the outside, you also have more understanding and context of what that means in the capability of that person and their talent profile from the organization they worked for compared to ours. So it adds that learning perspective, that contextual perspective, to drive additional insights. And I think, this last slide here is one that I like, just to show it's kind of another way of depicting the flow slide that you shared, of how when organizations take, a skill-based approach, all of these type of HR processes and practices come into play and start to get fed with, talent intelligence and skills information and insights. So it's not just at the top of the funnel, or it's not just for the employee experience for them to own themselves. It's now part of the overall organizational strategy and the leadership view into the enterprise. And it starts to cover all of these various kind of aspects of the talent cycle and the career journey. And all of that is also fed with a variety of data sets and data enrichment to bring in that internal and external view with that contextual understanding.
Jason, you have kind of an interesting experience yourself coming into Eightfold, and how this technology and the insights that it gave for you as a candidate.
Yeah.
Or a party that was interested in Eightfold, and how explainable AI really changed some opportunities that you might not have thought about before. Love to have you share that story.
Sure. Yeah. Real quick, I've gone through a couple career pivots. Like I said, I've been in HR as a TA leader. I've also been in the industry as an analyst. When I was considering career opportunities with Eightfold, the way the technology works, it truly is talent-centered design. You don't go in and search through a traditional career site like you normally do, where you have to put in keywords and look through the filters and select radio buttons to try to figure out how you orient to a company, or what does this company call this thing, or what is the function that, how do they refer to it. Basically, the way it works is you create a profile and it matches the opportunities to you, and it lets you know kind of what you'd be considered a strong match for, what you'd be considered a good match for, and it even shows you the other roles, so it doesn't prohibit you from seeing things. But if you're not a match, it explains to you why you weren't perceived to be a match. So true explainable AI. But in my own scenario at the time, I created a profile and it said I was a strong match for 6 different positions that were available at the time. But the interesting thing to me was, as I looked at them, they were in 4 different departments, and 2 of the departments were areas I never would have considered and didn't realize, how my skills would have translated. And it just kind of opened my eyes to opportunities for me in my career, but also was kind of a firsthand explanation of how the technology works.
That's great. I'm thinking about another audience segment that this strategy of the AI serving things up is really been transformative, and that's in terms of, changing the way we look at degrees. And we've recognized kind of in the U.S. recently, what a barrier we put in place over time to entry, and in particular, certain segments of our population who don't have as high a threshold of achieving degrees, and particularly 4-year degrees, were locked out of a lot of opportunities. And so, the 110 initiative, which is providing opportunities through a consortium of employers, over 50 employers who are seeking to provide 1 million Black Americans with career family-sustaining jobs over the next 10 years. That concept, again, that's being adopted to help address opening up opportunities and reducing barriers, I think is really another powerful outcome of this skills strategy, and also the technology enablement with the Eightfold platform kind of serving to help, just as you described, being able to match those skills to individuals and unearth those.
And I think that's a great example. Yeah, I think that's a great example, Sana. And, that's just one. We have others where we're doing similar initiatives for state Department of Labor career centers for job matching and skills matching. And then, like we shown in the previous slides, where it carries through the talent lifecycle, if you start to remove some of those barriers or some of those requirements, then you have to have some other way of building out your HR processes and practices and policies. So that's where having that kind of skills intelligence can feed into other strategies like pay for skills, especially when we're shifting into this new world of pay transparency. Well, if you're changing the criteria, you have to have some data set or some underlying approach for how you're going to then have your compensation strategy. So with many organizations taking on a pay for skills approach, that's another reason for having this kind of skills intelligence and this skills approach all the way through the life cycle.
Yeah, that's an area we'll really need to keep our eye on, isn't it? The pay for skills is evolving. Yeah, well, we wanted to just kind of wrap up our track here with a little bit of insight from the Deloitte 2023 Global Human Capital Trends Report. And the theme of this is boundaryless. And really, when you think about, all the change that we're seeing, really, a lot of these boundaries that we've had are breaking down, whether those are organizational or societal or workforce worker boundaries. And so we have these categorized based on this global data set that we go through every year. And some of these themes obviously fit really well with what we've been talking today about, this journey to skills-based organization, navigating the end of jobs. Again, a little bit provocative. It's definitely a journey, but we're in the midst of it, right? Powering human impact with technology. Jason, you mentioned build, buy, borrow, bot. And of course, we need to remember to put that, additional B on the end. We've considered that, quote, part of the super team concept of humans working effectively with technology.
Sure.
I know Eightfold had a press release yesterday kind of talking about some of the next evolution of technology and AI and where that's going. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Sure. So we're deploying some virtual assistant capability to help with recruiter and employee and candidate experience with some of the evolving capabilities that are occurring through technology, especially with generative AI and ChatGPT. I think part of this is just the pace of change and the capability and what technology can do is going to change the way we work significantly. But I think another part of it is there are certain elements of this kind of workflow and of this process where, people can use assistance for automation and efficiency. But then there's other pieces where it's very important to emphasize the human role in the process. So, we are adding new capability, but approaching it very responsively and thoughtfully. And a big part of how our system has been designed from the beginning is this concept of human-machine collaboration, with kind of the human at the center. So we do have new capabilities around those type of virtual assistant use cases, but we're approaching it very specifically and thoughtfully as to what those use cases are, while not removing the role of the individual kind of as they interact with the capability.
Yeah, and putting the human at the center of that is so important, right? Like we have this theme of making work better for humans and humans better at work, and essentially it's that, right? It's making sure that retaining that essential humanistic component and leveraging technology to the best of our ability there. Well, I know we've been sharing a lot of content with the audience. I think we probably want to just take a pause and see if we've got some questions that we want to chat about. Obviously, Jason, you and I can talk for hours, but let's see what maybe we might have some questions going on here.
Sana and Jason, thank you very much. We do have a question from the audience so far. If you have questions, please type them into the chat. First question here is, how do you begin and execute a process to collect all of your employees' skills, interests, and talents? Do you then use AI to match the skills with the jobs?
It's a great question, and it's not as overwhelming as it sounds. I think that's part of that slide that we showed around building this through all your processes. In a technology like ours with the talent intelligence platform, you have a dynamic profile that updates with you automatically, in addition to the information that you put into the profile. If you're, joining a project or taking a training course or part of a team, all of that gets automatically registered in the system, and the skills associated with that work automatically appear on your profile. And that's where we get a more comprehensive view of the people in your organization, more than just, their work history or the job that they're filling for your organization. And it updates, dynamically. So I think the first part is understanding what the work is and opening up the opportunity across the organization to start to incorporate it in more of a skills-based approach. But then by building it in as a process and a practice and a culture with some advanced technology like skills-enabled AI, it makes it a little easier to track and kind of understand and learn from that information. And then as a result, it becomes this kind of regenerative system to build on itself when it makes recommendations for the individual employee, for candidates looking for jobs and understanding people like them where they've gone in your organization, or as a manager and a leader going through upskilling reviews or succession planning decisions. So it starts to feed on itself. But there's a lot of organizations that we talk to that think you have to spend 1.5 to 2 years going through a very manual process to look at every single role and identify, your skills taxonomy and reevaluate all the information for the way you've always done this. And yes, you can do that, and it is very helpful. But if you start to incorporate, skills intelligence with this, it can actually build that for you as you go, and you can kind of get started at a much more faster pace.
Thank you, Jason. So is AI inferring the skills that a person has, or looking at a job description and extrapolating, or are you going out with some sort of questionnaire, people populating data in a system somewhere? I'm just curious how that works.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll tackle it and answer it kind of in 2 segments. The first one is we get the information that someone supplies, whether it's a resume, whether they create a profile, you get the information that they present to you. Now, one thing we know, some people over-present their skills, some people under-present their skills. So with the information that we're provided, you then can also incorporate things like skill inferences, as well as skill adjacencies and learnability. So I'll just share with you, let's say, for example, someone gave us a profile that was able to, on paper, highlight 7 to 10 skills. Well, with skills inferences and skill adjacencies, you can actually double or triple the data on that person beyond what they've given you, to then start to make recommendations on what things could be a possible fit or what things they may want to consider based off of the understanding of context of that skill information and capability of what that person is able to do. I think the other interesting piece is the way our AI works for contextual understanding, is that we're not just matching a profile to a job, we're looking at the context of how the organization interacts with that type of skills information. So in many instances, if we had the same profile being submitted for the exact same job at 2 different companies using our AI, the recommendation or the matching may be different based on the context of that setting. So for example, does that company value movement, or does that company value tenure, or does that company work on more of a project-based, or does that company work more on established roles? There's the context of how talent moves in that organization, how that organization values or interacts with talent, that also weighs in on the recommendation. So we've moved beyond just basic keyword matching.
All right. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Sana, did you have something to add?
Well, I was just going to say, listen, we've seen a lot of evolution in terms of the way the organizations are trying to get at the skills that exist in their organization today. And you said, are there, surveys or what things are happening? I think some of the interesting evolution on this is, we know that people self-reporting their skills is a start, but is not a great foundation for many reasons. You may have people with similar skills, but they may not take the time to report all the skills, or they may not think some of the skills that they have are important, right? So while self-reporting can be, a part of the equation, and manager validation of skills is another theme that we see organizations doing. And again, that yes, also helpful, but in the context of then being able to pull in other data sets, and as Jason was talking about, leverage, talent intelligence and have that help inform the process is something that we've really seen as an accelerator for some organizations. And I think the other thing to think about is, beyond what we traditionally think about as data sets that might inform skills, what those are, certainly gain skills in education, as was pointed out, certainly through job experiences, but the traditional mechanisms of those, whether those are resumes or LinkedIn profiles or internal profiles, we can enrich that by looking at other data sets that are available to us. And one that I think is quite interesting is, when you think about tech talent, the way communication happens within organizations, whether that's in Slack channels or information in GitHub or Jira or what have you, being able to harness some of that information and through natural language processing and these deep capabilities from an AI perspective, it really is giving us different insights than we have been able to traditionally get. And so I think it's a fascinating area that's going to continue to expand, certainly. And then the final point on that is, it doesn't take away the other aspects that we need to do in terms of, thinking about the validation process. So if you think about the hiring process, for example, using this to identify skills and match between what an organization is looking for and what individuals have, can also be augmented. And so it depends on the role, as Jason was saying, depends on the organizational strategy. But certainly things like interviews are still an important aspect of, the assessment process. And certainly we see lots of opportunities with other types of assessments that are technology-based, right? And so how we weave that together and really kind of create or architect the solution, to be aligned to that is definitely part of this work that we're all working on moving forward.
And John, And John, just to piggyback on that, we had one organization we were working with where, in addition to incorporating talent intelligence for kind of personalized career paths and skill development, they were using a third-party tool to kind of evaluate their workforce on leadership skills and leadership competencies. And, they were able to ingest that information into the talent intelligence platform. So that way on day one, when they turned it on and they went live with their employees, that information was already in the system and being used to partner with the talent intelligence recommendations to build out broader recommendations for learning and career paths and so on and so forth. And the way they approached it was, they did that to kick off and to start. And then later on, in their journey, they would come back and do, a second point in time evaluation to see the journey, the distance between kind of the first assessment scores and the second assessment scores. But I think part of this is the ability to incorporate a variety of data sets into the insights and evaluation, and then the ability to have the flexibility to generate those dynamic recommendations.
Very good. Thank you so much. There seems to be a spectrum of options here with, on the one side, you have standard jobs or job descriptions, which are fairly rigid. And on the other side, you have a completely open skills-based talent marketplace. Is there a middle ground, sort of a middle stepping stone, or do you have to go from one pole to the other pole?
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, I think, it's absolutely a journey that it's hard to go to in one big leap. Certainly, you can take pieces of it. I think that, really the takeaway from this is, looking at the value of this sort of a strategy, identifying how it fits in within your organization and putting a roadmap together, thinking about, the experimentation phase of this. Where can we start activating this? Where is it going to make the most value? And while we ultimately want to get to that, broader ecosystem approach, each organization can be on their own journey. So it's how do we get there? Lots of tools and steps that we can take to start setting that foundation. And actually, I think that's why the talent marketplace has been, has evolved and become quite popular, right? Because it gives some aspect to move from, and give people the opportunities to seek more formally these skill-based initiatives that are outside the traditional job. But, certainly looking at, this as a journey is appropriate.
And, Sana mentioned how we have a podcast called The New Talent Code. It's called The New Talent Code because we speak with talent leaders who are looking at new ways to build kind of their talent approach for the future. And one of the episodes, we were interviewing someone where they were disrupted entirely, due to changes as a result of the pandemic and the shutdown. Mm-hmm. And basically what they ended up having to do was they ended up having to look within their organization to say, who has these skills that we're going to need to deliver our product in an entirely new way and, communicate with customers in an entirely new way. And it didn't change their job title, their reporting structure, their org chart, but it, allowed them to address the work and the challenge at hand based off of the skills that people had to arrange themselves around the task and around the challenge. So I don't think that's kind of one pole or the other. It's kind of being able to operate in the middle. And, with business, in order for business agility, you need talent agility. And with talent agility, you kind of need that molecular approach, which is skills.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think we have time maybe for one or two more questions here. So you touched on this a little bit, Sana, and that was the compensation implications of a skill-based system. I'm wondering if you could go a little deeper, either Sana or Jason, into what you're seeing out there in companies that have embraced a skills-based system and how that's changing their structure in compensation.
Yeah, this is an area that I think, organizations are really starting to look at. And from a Deloitte perspective, we have our compensation team and our workforce transformation practice is actively working with organizations on strategies around that. It's a complex scenario, obviously, making that sort of a transition. And I think, as we saw earlier, one where there hasn't been as much traction yet, but a lot of discussion and interest in exploring that. So how do we take kind of our traditional mindsets about compensation strategy and management and start to transform that with skills-based? So we're seeing that in pockets and some evolution going on there. And I do know this is going to continue to be an area that we'll see evolving. Jason, not sure, thoughts from your side?
Yeah, I think it's kind of akin to, a few years ago, everyone was transitioning towards trying to deploy rating list performance reviews, right? And going through a performance management process without ratings. I think this is somewhat similar where, today, we look at who has a critical role and which job is critical for our organization. Well, if you change the mechanism by which you're viewing talent, you start to look at, well, who has a critical skill? And which skill is a rising skill that we're going to need in the future, or which skill is a rare skill that would be hard to replace or is hard to recruit for. So it's looking at, a process that isn't necessarily changing, but using different criteria to then evaluate.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because today I think people map job scope and responsibilities to a grading system of some sort.
Yeah.
And in a skills-based system, maybe they're now mapping critical skills to some sort of leveling or grading system. It could potentially be very disruptive, but maybe there's some baby steps that companies can take, and probably the source of a whole nother webcast and deeper dive here.
Good point.
All right. I think we're about out of time for questions, so I just want to say thank you to Jason Serrato and Sana Manzo for such a great conversation and sharing your deep experience with us today. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed today's program, please visit theconferenceboard.org/webcasts for a full roster of upcoming webcasts. We have a leadership and coaching conference coming up on June 1st to 2nd. So join your fellow human capital, talent, coaching, and leadership development peers during this 2-day virtual event where the agenda will address the challenge of how to build better leaders for the business needs of the future. Through case studies, action-oriented research, and spotlight on emerging technology trends, we'll explore how organizations are leveraging leadership development and coaching to transform both leaders and the business. Registration is complimentary for members of the conference board. The 2023 Engaged at Work Conference will focus entirely on engagement and the employee experience, showcasing the latest insights and case studies from leaders across major corporations, government agencies, and nonprofit organizations. So we expect this to be a really good conference. As an attendee, you will have access to exclusive research from Conference Board, insights from C-suite and senior leaders from Fortune 500 companies, as well as exciting innovators in the engagement space. This event will also provide you with the opportunity to take full advantage of the in-person experience with time to ask questions, join small group discussions, and to connect with your fellow attendees. Finally, we're really proud at the Conference Board to have recently launched the TCB Insights app. With the app, you can easily connect with peers in your community, register for our events, and find the latest research, podcasts, and webcasts. Download it today. Thanks again to Jason and Sana, and thanks to all of you for joining us. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.